I'm Andrew Dell'Antonio. I am Distinguished Teaching Professor in the Musicology at the Musicology Division in the Butler School of Music.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming by, and we've got some cool stuff to talk about today. Something that is probably not thought about that much, but that's really important, which is the syllabus.
That's right.
And this is something that has changed, I would say, since I've started teaching, since I was a student.
Yes.
And not for the better. I feel that students look at the syllabus less and less. It has less importance to them. Mm-hmm. And this is something you want to change. You want to bring back in a different way, but a really cool way. And you put forth a really neat concept that's not just flowery language. You actually put forth some things you really want to do.
Right, some practical things.
Absolutely. Right. So let's start. How did you get this idea?
I got started on this a number of years ago. So this is overall is a project that we're going to be talking about that officially just got underway this year, with co-led by me and E.G. Gionfriddo, who is the head of the dance area of our Department of Theater and Dance in the College of Fine Arts at UT. And we had met through a program actually run by the Center for Teaching and Learning, with which we've both been working quite a bit. And we were thinking about this idea of, now that we've been hit by COVID and everybody's been disrupted so badly by it, and now that we've had years in which students have been absolutely burnt out, and we've legitimately wanted to give them the opportunity to not have to come to class as much because they were worried about their health. How do we get people back into the classroom in a way that still honors the fact that COVID is not over? And some students may be concerned, and some students have, in fact, legitimate reasons for not being able to come into class. But also, how do we make ourselves accountable, right? So the name of this project is Building Rigorously Compassionate Syllabi, Fostering Individual Accountability and Community Care. And the idea is that we want everybody to be accountable, and also we want the community to be accountable to each member. And a classroom is a learning community, and we want to think of it that way. And so how does the document of agreement, what are we going to do this semester, how does that set up the idea of we are a bunch of people coming in to learn together? So I've been doing some of this in my own classes for several years in a variety of ways. And then, of course, COVID lockdown hit, and online teaching was a thing. And so the whole question of creating a classroom community became more complicated. But ultimately, one of the things I've been very interested in is an approach called, a lot of people call universal design for learning, UDL. And there are a lot of different ways you can define UDL. But the way I like to think of it is that it's a way to set up a learning space so that you try to include everybody in your planning, with the understanding that you can't do that. That some people will come and say, I know you've built this class to be accessible to me and to all my classmates, but for me, this aspect of the class is not going to work because I can't do that for these legitimate reasons. So I need to trust my student, and at that point, I need to be able to say, okay, let's implement a change to the plan, to the syllabus, so that you also feel like you are welcome into this space, even though there are some things about the expectations that you can't do. And so it really is a way to try to customize learning so that each individual student has the support they need. But it's also, and so this is what this project is about, a way to have that conversation happen not only between the instructor and the student, which it does formally and it needs to, but also among the whole class. How does each member of the class support each member of the class? How is it not just about the instructor teaching and being in charge, but about the whole community coming up with ways to really function as a learning community? And again, this is a principle that I've been very interested in, partly because of my interest in disability and inclusion of disabled folks and inclusion across the board. But this project, particularly then coming back to the question of the syllabus, because the syllabus is a place that you start. And of course, it can't be the place where you finish. It can't be, here's a piece of paper, it's done, right? And now we're going to go through the semester and nothing is going to change. Because again,
which
life
is what
changes.
It usually is.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately.
That's exactly. Yeah. And that's the way I was trained to think of the syllabus is a syllabus and it doesn't change. And if the student doesn't like it, well, suck it up, buttercup, because those are the rules. And that is a way of building a system that inherently will exclude a lot of people who may be people who have particular structural difficulties with certain kinds of actions, but also maybe people who have a life event, which we do have life events, right? Like our parents pass away, or we get very ill, or there are so many things that happen in our lives as faculty and as students, and a syllabus that doesn't change does not in any way take account of that. So for example, if you set up an attendance policy where you say, if you miss X number of classes, then your grade goes down a letter, right? This has been a very long-standing practice, one that I learned to put in place, that I used for many years, and then I realized after a while that some of our students work full-time. Other students don't work full-time. The students who work full-time oftentimes are stretched so hard that the attendance policy is actually not equitable to them, right? Equal, it's the same for everybody, is not necessarily equitable. And this is a really challenging thing in any context and also in academia, because the idea is, well, everybody's got to do the same thing in a class. You know, if you want to earn an A, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then you don't earn the A. And what E.G. and I are trying to think about is there a way to massage that, to tweak that, to have conversations about that, so that learning can absolutely be monitored, can happen, can be fostered, but it's not about punishing students who have a lot of stuff on their plate. And these days, so many of our students have so much on their plate in the fine arts, particularly in the performing arts. So we're trying to make this whole thing a compassionate one, that we have compassion for each other, students for faculty, faculty for students, and still we're accountable to each other. So if a student cannot come to class, does not come to class, cannot come to class, in certain kinds of classes, this is especially visible and quote unquote a problem. So performing arts is a great example of this. In fact, we're actually really happy that have the opportunity to experiment with this initially. This is a 3-year project. We have a cohort of faculty in music and in theater who are going to be experimenting with this coming year. In the performing arts, we have this idea that if you're part of an ensemble, right, in a musical ensemble or a theatrical ensemble, a production, and you're not there, then it's a problem, understandably, right? The smaller the ensemble, the more the problem it is. And so you can't just, oh, well, you know what, I'm not going to show up because I don't feel like it and I don't care, right? Mm-hmm. That is not accountability. On the other hand, if one of our students has COVID, really intense COVID, we don't want them to come to the ensemble rehearsal and help get their classmates sick. And there are many things in between. You know, if a student has a car accident, there are so many, you know, how do you measure whether somebody deserves to not be someplace? Both in school and beyond. Some people say, well, people got to learn because in the real world there are consequences. Well, yes, but also in the real world, people work around.
Yeah, a lot of crap happens in the real world.
A lot of crap happens in the real world. And good employers, you know, work with you if you find ways to be accountable. So how do we define accountability, right? On the one hand, of course, by default, show up, you're accountable, good, right? If you're for example, back to this image of the ensemble rehearsal, right? So let's say you're in chamber orchestra and you show up, you play, you've rehearsed, you are present, you're focused, bingo, right? That's what we want, because that is how not only are you going to learn, but how your classmates are going to get the best experience. And of course, the audience eventually, right? So it's really through your being present as much as you can be. And great if you're feeling healthy and you don't have to, you know, work 40 hours a week to support yourself. Of course, you know, it would be a dang good thing if you did that. If you get very ill, if your mom is seriously ill and you need to go help her, what does it mean for you to not be present and still be accountable to an ensemble or to a class? So this, again, there's no easy answer to this, but ensemble directors do face this, and there are humane and thoughtful ways to deal with this because, again, also in the real world, this thing happens. And being able to care for oneself and for one's family, if we can't do that in the real world, then we're not in a very good place at all. And if we can't do that in school, then we're really not training you for the real world, because you need to know this stuff happens, because your friends, your classmates, your employees will also have these things happening. So the whole question of, can we trust students to be accountable to themselves and to us and to each other, that's really, I mean, that's the first step. And some of us choose to say we have to. As soon as we start mistrusting students, As soon as we start second guessing them, saying, well, they're trying to game the system, so we can't excuse them because, right, then the community loses trust in the fact that we're all pulling in the same direction. Now, do some people break trust? Do some people take advantage? Yeah, they do. But
it's rare here in UT.
I think so.
It is.
And particularly in the Butler School, our students are insanely dedicated. I mean, really amazingly dedicated.
Yes.
They've come here. They've really trained for so many years. They work so hard. And they come close to burnout. I mean, honestly, and I don't know if this will make it to the recording, but our degree program is actually just this short of inhumane in terms of what it expects of students, right? Students are expected to take a certain number of credit hours, of course, but also there are a lot of commitments within performance, and this is also true, I gather, from E.g. of dance and other performing arts students, that are beyond what's strictly required for your classes and for your ensembles. And students do it eagerly and willingly because they know that that's how they gain experience, and also they stretch themselves super, super hard. So what I'll circle to now is the kind of classes that I teach. Okay, so I do not teach ensemble performance classes. I'm a musician, I'm a performer. My performance career has mostly been in the background, certainly since I came to teach here. And I was never somebody who really focused more on performance than on...
What do you play?
So I play the recorder.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, which is right. And I decided...
You could have given me 100 guesses. I would have not guessed that.
That's it. I should ask you, what would you have guessed? Piano? Keyboard?
I would have guessed early music something.
Yeah, I am an early music person. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have guessed that.
Yeah, so I am an early music...
It's the bow tie.
It's the bow tie, exactly right. Although I'll say, so quick side story here, the bow tie is partly because my former colleague, Michael Tusa, who retired, emeritus professor here, who retired 3 or 4 years ago, always wore a bow tie. And he was brilliant and amazing and wonderful and my best, most reliable senior colleague. And when he retired, we were actually online because of COVID, we had a roast for him. And I said, Michael, somebody's got to wear the bow tie. And I promised I'll learn how to tie a bow tie and wear it in your honor. So I used to wear four in hand sort of those, and I still do. From early on, since I got my doctoral degree, so I got a doctoral degree in music history and musicology from University of California at Berkeley. And I was pretty young when I got the degree, and I was pretty fresh-faced. Now, lots of gray, so whatever. But back then, I looked kind of young. And so at that point, I grew a beard for a while, and I started wearing ties, figuring, well, that's how I'm going to look authoritative. And then I kind of got into it. Ties are a way guys can make things kind of interesting and fancy. And so
we don't have a lot of options.
Exactly.
We're not like women that have,
exactly. I mean, these days, folks, thankfully, are a little more sort of free with it. But in the,
I wasn't trying to.
No, that was fine. But generally speaking, it's not the kind of thing that we grew up with, right? So I didn't grow up with the idea of, okay, I can wear really flashy clothes. Also, because for whatever reason, it didn't speak to me. But I thought, okay, I can wear kind of relatively regular clothes and ties. So. All is to say, Michael is actually a 19th century scholar. So the early music thing doesn't map exactly, but it's true. I do have a number of early music nerd friends who do in fact wear bow ties. So circling back to that. But yeah, so I came to music as a performer on the recorder, other early wind instruments. I sang some, although I'm not that good a singer. But once I got to college, my family is an academic family. My stepfather is a historian, medieval historian. And I was very interested in culture. And I'm originally from Italy. I came to the States when I was 9, but I've been back there a fair amount because my father and lots of relatives are still there. And so I was always very, very interested in the way that culture operates with things. And so culture and music went together. I got a Bachelor of Arts in music in college. And from there I decided, wow, I really want to learn how to teach music history. And so that's what I went to do. So I kept playing. I kept playing in ensembles through grad school. When I first came here many years ago, I played some with our early music ensembles, some with early music groups in town. I'm kind of rusty these days. Actually, for many years, we had a Bach cantata project here in the Butler School of Music. And I often was brought in as a ringer because some of you may know, J.S. Bach wrote for the recorder a number of times in his cantatas.
So I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
It was very, it was at his time it was perceived as sort of a retro instrument, as it were, looking back, but he used it for particular expressive purposes. And some of his most beautiful cantatas incorporate the recorder as the wind instrument. And again, if you have a small ensemble, it works beautifully. If you have a big ensemble, it gets lost. But anyway, so I decided that I wanted to study music history. I went and did that, and So the classes that I teach are not performance classes, although I do in my classes talk a fair amount about improvisation in early repertories, and I demonstrate. So I do, in fact, still play to show here is what improvisation looks like in these contexts. But I teach music history classes. So the class, for example, that I'll be leading this fall, on which will be incorporating even further some of these principles that I've been talking about, is the first semester of our music history sequence for music majors. It's actually not the first course they take in music and culture, because the last 8 years or so we've had this fantastic freshman level course that's called Music and Culture, which is sort of a kitchen sink introduction to lots of issues in music and culture. It's a fantastic class that we always co-teach with 2 faculty and several graduate students. We have 120 students, all music majors and then a few non-majors, and we throw in all sorts of things about how music works in culture, and we bewilder the first year students in the best way. And I have to say, ever since we started doing that, students come into the first semester of music history with a much more nuanced way of thinking about how music and culture work. Because many of our music students, they look at the title of the class and say, oh, music history, I hate history, whole bunch of names, whole bunch of dates. And understandably, they show up at 9 o'clock in the morning, the first day of class, and they are concerned that I'm going to give them a whole bunch of names and dates to learn. As it turns out, I actually can't remember names and dates either. I don't know why I went into this business, but I try to help them make sense of the fact that history is about telling stories. We tell stories about music, and in particular, so much of the music we study is from the past, and we should think about why we still study it, why we still play it, if it still serves us, and what stories we tell about it. And so that's sort of how I frame the course, is we want to figure out how these stories came about, if they're still useful to us, if these repertories are still useful. And one thing that's cool for me is, when I was a whippersnapper coming up through the ranks and I was taking classes of this sort, we had a few recordings of historical repertories, and they were kind of meh. They were there and they were what they were, and they were on these things called LPs, right, for the classes. And now, of course, everything's streaming, but there are so many more really interesting and creative performances of these early repertories, because people have now come to them and said, these are resources for us to make what we want to make, which is what music always is, right? Music is always something on a page, if it's notated, that you have to make something of in a way that is meaningful to your modern audience. And in fact, in these historical repertories, there's a lot more that's left up to the performer on purpose, because these were created by performers to show off their own performance skills. And so they are potentially still extremely interesting for modern performers to draw from, to show how you can be expressive. And what's interesting, again, also to me is, again, because they are set up in such a flexible way, there's a lot that students can experiment with. But all this to say that when students come into a class like this, it's all of the second year students in the music major. So there's about 80 students. And they don't think of it as a performance class, rightly so, I suppose, because it's a classroom class. So they don't think of it as an ensemble, per se, that they need to practice and come in and work with each other in order to help each other learn. So I try the very first day to say, look, this may not look like this, but that's what this is. In some way, that this is what this is. Of course, what we do, doing history, is different, perhaps from playing, although not always. But I want us to think about how can we all be together and contributing to each other's thinking more deeply about these kinds of ideas. So it's not just me lecturing at you. I like to talk, just in case you hadn't noticed. And in fact, I've had to work hard on not just telling stories, because I like to tell stories. But there's a lot of research that shows very clearly that people discussing, students teaching each other, students working together on projects is a much deeper and more stable learning experience than them listening to somebody yap.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and students, unfortunately, often don't know and or believe that. So, I always have an anonymous mid-semester survey where I ask the students, okay, what's going well, what's going badly, what would you like? And always there's, I wish you lectured more, right? And I have to say thank you, and I appreciate your trust in me, but also objectively, that is actually not the best way to learn. I mean, it can be interesting to hear a good story, and that's also what we talk about, right?
Yeah.
Because But I also want them to learn to tell good stories because they're going to have lecture recitals, they're going to do performances, and if they want to get up and tell about the music, or if they want to write program notes that aren't too completely tedious or whatever, they need to be able to tell stories that are compelling that then go along with the performance. So this idea of being accountable to each other in a class like that is really tricky because, understandably, students are taking so many other classes, they're taking lessons, they're taking ensembles, studio classes, and they are so overwhelmed that they say, well, if I'm going to not work so much on one thing, it'll be the thing that isn't quite as clearly relevant to what I'm doing right now. And the first semester that I teach, the music that we tend to study, because we've done a historical trajectory, is very early. I start with plain chant. Students say, plain chant, right? I mean, and we deal with repertories up to about the 1700s. And it's hard many times for students to click and say, okay, this is potentially truly relevant to me. So there's a roundabout way to come back to this project to say, how do we set up the syllabus, but also assignments, but also the day-to-dayness of a class like that to make it feel like you are accountable to your learning and also to your classmates. And if you don't come, and if you're not available to your classmates as a resource to talk about stuff, then you're selling your classmates short as well as yourself. You're not learning the way you could, and your classmates aren't learning the way they could. So it's not just about me, being sad if attendance is not great. It's about loss of opportunity. Mm-hmm. And again, for a lot of faculty, the issue is, if you don't show up, you have to because you have to learn these things, and there'll be this material that you will have to be tested on at the end of the semester. I have to say that more and more, I've been getting away from the idea of tests that all students take to demonstrate the same knowledge, because in terms of knowledge pieces of music, right? So again, the way I learned music history, the way I taught music history for many years, it's here's a test, here's a bunch of pieces of music, who wrote the piece, when was it written, all those kinds of factual information, recall kind of stuff. I discovered that in a semester, most students forgot it all. And so what's the point? What's the point of having students struggle through this, feel like it's a pain in the neck, and then a semester later, because probably they thought it was a pain in the neck, forgot it all? So what I do, I have an exercise that I call Make Your Own Canon. And canon, for listeners who aren't familiar with this, it's actually a term that means a lot of things. But in the context of this class, it means a bunch of music that is good, that we have kept around because it's good. And so much of the music we study here at UT is part of various intersecting, connecting canons, right? There is the band, the good pieces for wind band, and the good pieces for orchestra, and the good pieces, yada, yada. And they're not all the same, but there are commonalities. And so one of the big things we talk about is, how does it even happen that these pieces come together and are recognized as good? Is it some objective set of traits, or is it, as it is, people back then liking their teacher's music, wanting to be esteemed because of who their teacher was, like we do now, and saying, well, the piece you want to keep is my teacher's piece because it's better, and by the way, hire me to play it. Yeah. I mean, I'm simplifying, but there is a big piece of that in what canon becomes. So I asked the students, okay, we have an anthology. Again, we're still doing this, actually. We're using the same publisher that I used 1,000,000 years ago. But we have a set of pieces, a book that the students purchase that has some good commentary and a set of examples of key pieces, significant pieces across time and space. And so instead of saying, memorize a subset of these and we're going to have a test and you're going to tell me what they are, and if you don't tell me, then you fail, I say, at every 5 weeks, we do this in a smaller thing and we do it bigger. Pick 5 pieces that we've studied. And these are sort of the desert island pieces, right? These are the ones that you still want to remember. And then tell me what they are and why. Why these 5? It's a lot harder to cheat with that. I mean, students still will try to cut corners, and I respect that. I mean, we all cut corners sometimes when things aren't significant. But if I say, find 5 pieces of music that are significant for you and tell me why, then the incentive is a little lower than memorize all these that you don't give a about.
Plus, you get to hear a bunch of cool pieces you've probably never heard of before.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And the cool thing is exactly that on the one hand, most of them initially come from the anthology that we've used. So I know many of them because I want them to think about, well, of the ones that have been preserved, right, that are official in this book, which ones you still want to keep. But also pick one other one, right? And I tell them you can find the other one because I introduce other pieces from outside that, but also go on YouTube. Try to find something that relates to these in terms of tradition, in terms of time frame, and that you think is really cool. And again, the students who I like best are the ones where I go all sorts of places with that. And by the end of the semester, I say every single piece you choose can be one of those. Right? The first two chunks what they do is pick 4 that are from this book and 1 outside. But then I say the last time, pick 15. You can reuse the past ones. But if you really want to think about this deeply, 15 pieces from 500 years that you still want to know about and think about a few years from now. Which are they and why? Right?
That's really cool.
And I wish somebody had done that for me. I mean, that's kind of what I ended up doing myself because I thought this stuff was cool over time. Mm-hmm. But more students find that meaningful. Surprise, surprise, right? We're always going to have a few students who are inherently music history nerds, who then are going to like this stuff anyway, and that's awesome. But what's interesting in music history study, except for those of us who were interested in history from the very beginning because of our family and how we grew up, is there are very few music students who come to UT, to BSOM, and they say, I want to be a music history major. We have a Bachelor of Arts. We have a track that is music history track. That's a musicology track. But most students come, I want to be a performer.
Did you say, now when you entered undergrad, what were you?
So I was at a liberal arts college where I knew that I could study music in context. I actually thought I was going to be a psych major when I first got into college. Then I got a C in my first psych class because I couldn't memorize.
Those tests are hard.
Those tests are hard.
Those multiplication tests.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yes. But where I went was a place that had a lot of music history focus.
Okay.
And had faculty who were really experts, and the degree itself was not primarily a performance degree. So unlike here, where most of our students are in the Bachelor of Music in Performance or Bachelor of Music Studies for music education, we have a fair number of Bachelor of Arts students, but not that many of them really decide when they first get here that they're really interested in pursuing music history as a career. So, sometimes, I kind of recruit students in the first year, but it's not my goal. I've had some colleagues in the past, not currently, who really wanted every student to become a music history fan. And that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Students come because of their passion. And if I can add to their passion by helping them think about other directions they can take their passion, and that's what I want to do. So, what does the syllabus do? The syllabus sets up a set of guidelines. Here is what we're going to do. Here's what to expect. Here is how I expect you to think about accountability to yourself and to your classmates. Here is what I'd like you to do every week. Here is a breakdown of how what you do every week will translate into a grade. But I don't have an attendance policy per se. So I don't say if you are absent X number of times, your grade goes down. I don't, because if you're not there because you want to be there, then you're going to be there saying, well, I don't know, it's kind of, I don't really like being here. Trust me, I've seen that a lot, right? And so this class that I teach is a required class. And that's always really tricky because oftentimes required classes are classes that people take because they have to and they don't really understand why.
Yeah.
And so as much as I can do, so connects back to this idea of universal design for learning. So again, principles of universal design for learning are, it resonates with this idea of learning styles that actually don't really exist, but this idea that there are many different ways of making sense of something, right? Many ways of, you can watch a video, you can read a book, you can listen to a podcast, whatever it is, right? And while people are not a visual learner or an auditory learner, it is true that if we have multiple ways to engage with something, it's more likely that we're going to latch on to something.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's actually crucial. For example, there's some people for whom reading is a real problem, right? Whether you're diagnosed with dyslexia or otherwise. Some people for whom listening is a problem. And it's also true that more and more students are not given the chance in K through 12 to read long form. So to read something that's 15, 20, 30 pages. Again, some of my colleagues tear their hair out about this. It is what it is.
Yeah, you can't fight society.
You can't, right. And so
Yeah.
some of it is helping students understand how to start doing that if they find it useful. And that's part of what my course does. And part of it is providing things that are at the level that will be compelling. And so different ways to engage with material, different ways to demonstrate their knowledge. I don't have time tests, but I have a variety of different assignments. And I tell students, if you'd rather come to me and talk me through this because you like talking more than writing, I'm totally happy for you to do that instead. So different options for you to demonstrate that, okay, I am thinking about this, I am doing this work, different medium. And then the final sort of category in this idea of UDL, Universal Design for Learning, this idea of multiple ways to engage, not just, media, right, books or videos, but multiple reasons to find something compelling. And that is the most challenging, the most important for me, right? Why should I even care about this? Because if you care about this, then you're going to put some work into it. And if you don't, then it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to do that. And so how can I make this particular topic relevant coming from a variety of different perspectives? How can I help students apply this in a variety of different ways to things that they already know that they're interested in? So how can I build my syllabus, my plan of teaching, what the students see, receive, encounter, with all these choices to make it clear that I want to meet you halfway. And at the same level, I need you to meet me and your classmates halfway. Because again, if you're not here, then ain't no learning happening in the group, and some of the most important learning happens in the group.
Yeah.
And so, but this is tricky because again...
Oh, it's really hard.
It's hard.
Yeah, this is hard stuff.
It's hard stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, okay, we have the answer and we're going to snap our fingers and it's going to happen. But both E.G. and I have been thinking about this a lot, again, especially in the aftermath of people being super eager to come back in person after the lockdown, but also being more easily overwhelmed.
Yes, there is that.
There is
that.
that.
What is that?
Gosh, if I knew.
Okay.
Especially if I knew how to fix it. I mean, I think some of it is just... So I've had people who I trust suggest that a lot of the students who were juniors and seniors in high school during lockdown did not have the opportunity to work together, right? To build the routines, just the systematic, here's how you get up and do the things and try to make yourself energetic about the things and feel like things are worth doing, right? And so much, it's interesting, clearly so much of that gets practiced, especially from the independent standpoint in the last couple of years of high school. And so a lot of the students who really did not get the chance to do that much in high school came here and were hampered by that. I think also the world's on fire. I mean, not to be flippant about it, but so many things are really difficult these days.
Yes.
And my stepson just turned 18. He's about to go off to college, not here. But I think where he's going is appropriate for him. And he has conveyed that his classmates really find it hard to think about how to make it worthwhile. And that's sad, but it's also a challenge for us to help students embrace their passion. So back to students who come to Butler. Students who come to Butler have a passion, right? Students come here because they've been working really hard. They really care about music. And they care about their communities. They care about their ensembles. They care about each other so much. I think that is definitely a thing. I've seen that even though there are situations where individual students are struggling more, finding it harder to come to class, things like that, students are looking out for each other at least as much as they were, which sometimes leads to cheating, where students are helping each other through a thing. And so there again,
Is it cheating or is it collaboration? Sometimes it's
cheating. I don't know. I have a colleague who's a little, provocative. He says people cheat when they don't see the point of a thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth in that. Also, people cheat, and this is absolutely true, when they are freaked out about their grades. And if they don't get an A, then they will ... Which is why grades are evil. You can quote me on that. Maybe you cut that one out. No, this is why grades are a real issue. And many of us who do assign grades have learned over the years that grades are arguably disincentive for learning sometimes, because students might work harder towards a grade, but then they'll cut corners, and the outcome that leads to the grade is more important than the process.
Yes.
And that's the great thing about, again, music and performance and dance. The process is huge, right? You work your way through the process, you practice, you mess things up, you do it again, you stay with it, you get support from your ensemble leader, from your ensemble mates, and you come up with something that is really spectacular. And you learn that kind of discipline through practice in music. And this is why music majors in their performance classes get A's so much, because they do great work.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, people freak out about grade inflation, but frankly, the learning that happens in music classes is really extraordinary. And so then you come to classes like mine, where students are objectively, taking tests or not, writing papers, which my students do, a particular kind of paper. And so then they get grades for the papers, which is a bit closer to a university standard. And then I give everybody A's because they're all working really hard. And thankfully, now that I'm old and gray and wear bow ties, people don't question me on it as much. But this is tricky for a lot of faculty, is if you want to let everybody succeed and therefore acknowledge that everybody's excellent, some folks will look at you and say, whoa, your standards have gone way down because somebody's got to fail. And what? Somebody's got to fail? I mean, what kind of attitude is that? And yet we have this long-standing idea about bell curves and the fact that there's got to be distribution and so forth. But again, I take my inspiration as a musician from music ensembles where, it is possible to not succeed in an ensemble if you can't do it. But that's not the point, right? You're not brought into an ensemble knowing that somebody's going to fail. That would be just bizarre. So I keep trying, and so again, back to this project is, I think it's a great project to start in a performing arts context. And I'm glad that we're doing it across music and theater, because we've got some faculty in theater, faculty in music, some of our graduate students. We're just going to be implementing some of the ideas in our courses in the fall and getting together once a week, once every other week to talk through, okay, how's it going? And how's it coming along? And at the end of the semester, we're gonna survey our students and say, okay, what do you think? What do you think now about this whole idea of accountability? Because we want this to be an iterative process over. We're funded for 3 years through the Center for Teaching and Learning. This is a program called Provost Teaching Fellows, and EG's and mine is the first joint one that has been proposed and accepted. But the program's been in place 10 years, and all across the university, there's been all these great opportunities to help students learn more effectively, more smoothly, and help faculty work with students in community.
Yeah. What does accountability look like to you?
Yeah, I think accountability looks differently depending on the context. How's that for a vague historian way of saying things? See, my wife always tells me that I'm too much about context, but for gosh sakes. I think accountability is about doing what you can for yourself and for the community as much as you can do it in that particular moment.
Yeah. What would you say, because I'm sure you see this a lot of mental health issues going on. And I think, part of this is, I can only imagine going through COVID as a high school kid.
Yeah.
You're told you might die,
right.
And it's like,
right.
At these
right.
formative years,
yes.
So, and I think there's other reasons too, social media, right? The Surgeon General just put.
That's right.
So there's a lot, and we just never had to contend with this stuff.
That's true.
Everything you do is like public.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So, but how do you have accountability when maybe someone is struggling with pretty severe mental health for maybe the entire semester?
Right.
Because I'm sure you see this. I see this a lot.
Absolutely. And it's absolutely true. It's I think one very good thing is that the support systems for accommodation and such have become much more robust at UT and elsewhere. And so more students, having gone through high school, either with diagnoses or not, and knowing that they are entitled to support when they're having difficulties, are reaching out for them here at UT, and having our Center for Disabilities, called Disability and Access, document the fact that they do deserve flexibility with assignments and so forth. And so that, I think, is good that that's in place. And there's no doubt that many more students are availing themselves of that. And some people see that as diagnosis creep, but I see it as acknowledgement of something that hasn't really ever been talked about before, or has been talked about as much. But that is a very good point. And again, can I find a way to build flexibility into my course so that a student can have an experience that is meaningful for themselves and in some way for their classmates, even if they cannot physically be in class 50% of the time?
Yeah.
And the short answer is yes, I have to. And the more complex answer is, well, if half of the students are in that position, then what do you do? And so that's back to, well, I'm not sure, but I'm glad I have some colleagues, and we're all going to sort of go through this again, because this has been absolutely, it's been true that every semester, I have to say, I guess last fall, maybe a little less than the previous fall, but certainly since after lockdown, there have been more students who 3-4 weeks in vanish. Right?
Yes.
They have burnt out, and they are ashamed, and they don't know what to do. And if a student comes to me and says, oh my gosh, these things are happening, I need support, I can work with them all the way up to the end of the semester.
Yeah.
But if a student doesn't, and I reach out to them, and the TA reaches out to them, and they don't respond, then it's harder. Now, if I can establish with the students that they are accountable for each other's well-being, and if students understand that helping another student deal with, come talk to me, come talk to the TA, communicating with the faculty through a classmate rather than through themselves, I'm good with all of that. And I think then the accountability is there too, is that it is absolutely individual accountability in the sense that you are here and you are here to learn and to build your strengths and to leave here with more than you came in with.
Yeah.
So the student is accountable for that in a course here in the program. I'm accountable for providing the opportunities for students to do that, and as much as possible for giving them enough to challenge them and not so much to squish them, right? And that's a complicated thing because everybody's got a different challenge and squish level, but acknowledging that is the first step, because again, if you have a syllabus with just one set of metrics and one set of tests and so forth, then the people who can do it, and those who can't just can't, right? And there is no acknowledgement of, no, actually, everybody's going to be able to do different things. I think accountability in our vision, and exactly what that'll look like will depend class to class, but is about everybody being accountable to each other. And I do think performing arts students are inherently, potentially more tuned into that than other students might be. A few years ago, for a number of years, I was leading the undergraduate studies team in the College of Fine Arts as Associate Dean. So I got to know the visual arts people fairly well, and our sort of studio art students. And the studio art students tend to be very individualistic in the sense that, yes, they do have group classes, but then it's very much about, I do my artistic project. And they don't tend to be collaborative, just by nature. We music historians don't tend to be collaborative either. And I have to say that some of my best, most joyful work has been the last 10 years when I've really started purposely saying, no, I think it's more interesting to work with people. Teamwork is really important.
Yeah.
And learning to work in a team with people who have different strengths is crucial for quote unquote real life, as well as it is here. And it's something, again, that our students experience every day in their ensembles, in the studio classes, even, and some students more than others. I mean, there's this stereotype that keyboard players, pianists have this less. But actually, I think here at BSOM, we help our pianists become tuned in to collaborative work better than many other places do. Actually, I think we've been doing that better and better over the years. When I first came here, there was this sense that pianists just practice on their own and really were doing their own thing. Whereas now I think more and more of our piano players are very much thinking about themselves as collaborators. But regardless, then you come into an academic class, and a lot of that is framed as, well, you got to do your own work. And if you're working with somebody else, then you're cheating. So I have to kind of work with that and tell the students, you need to bring your own thinking to this, and also what that means in terms of being able to work collaboratively. You can work collaboratively and bring your own thinking. Yeah. That's what chamber music is all about. So how can we design assignments? How can we create assignments? How can you demonstrate that you are not just leaning on your buddy who's going to be annoyed at you because if you lean on them. I mean, you find that out pretty quick.
Yeah.
But also that, and so that you're learning to work collaboratively, but also that you bring something to the picture. And then, the whole, the big unknown here, and it's a bit to the margins of all this, is the whole AI question, right? And I don't necessarily go down a rabbit hole in AI, but that is a piece of this. But again, my hope, I'm a Pollyanna kind of person, my hope is that if you're invested in doing something that you find meaningful, then whatever tools you use are to the service of doing something meaningful, rather than just, cutting corners and doing things as quickly as possible because you just want to get it over with.
Yeah.
But that's a shift in attitude, can be a shift in attitude about certain things. All of our students come in here and say, I want to be meaningful with my instrument, with my voice. I want to make music that's meaningful, and they're going to put a lot of work into that. And anything they cut corners with in that is to the service of making it more meaningful, and so okay, right? I mean, I'm not going to get too fussy. If I'm asking you to write a paper or I'm asking you to write about a piece of music, right? If you have something interesting to say and then you say, well, I don't write very well, so I want to clean it up because I want to make it prettier. I'd rather you didn't do that because I'd rather hear your voice. But honestly, if I can tell that you're the one coming up with the ideas, then I don't care if you use AI to clean it up because that's not the point. In fact, a lot of our international students, graduate students, are initially were extremely shaken by the idea of, my God, how can I write so much when I don't really know the language and so forth. And what I always tell them is, here are some fantastic automatic translation programs, right? If you feel that bad about it, right? If you feel that bad about your writing, write in your native language and translate it. And then we can talk about cleaning it up, because many of you will go back to your native country, and that's what we want to do. You want to develop your way of telling important stories about what you want to tell about. And there is value to learning how to write better, but if that's not your goal, and if you're trying to cut corners in order not to do it, then I'm not going to kill myself trying to make you do it. So I don't know. Again, there's many, many, many complicated things about AI that I don't even know the quarter of. And every semester,
knows the quarter.
No one knows quarter, exactly. Yeah. And every semester, we're going to run into more complicated things, also because, of course, the university is understandably wanting to bring AI to students in whatever way can be useful for students. And that way, depending on the discipline, might be one thing or the other. And so I'm on a writing course committee at the university level, and we've had some really interesting discussions about, okay, how do we feel, what do we do about the university bringing in potentially AI resources for students to write better? Our general attitude is, well, humans talk to humans, and so humans should work with humans on how to make humans express each other more effectively. I'm okay with that. And we as musicians, unless you want an AI to play music for you, then you probably want to play your own music. Mm-hmm. And so, but on the other hand, what is it that you're trying to get the AI to do? So I don't know, again, it's a complicated thing, but that is another piece that in this idea of being rigorous, right? What does it mean to be rigorous? Because we've talked about this idea of accountability, right? Community. E.G. and I batted around this title for a while, this idea of rigorously compassionate, right? Two words that are a little contradictory with each other. So, part of it is, people often talk about rigor as being very systematic, right? Is that you're not just doing it whatever, but you're doing it rigorously. Of course, rigor also implies things that are dead, right? And so one wants to be careful about things being too rigorous, because things that don't move are also rigorous. But this idea of being systematic, being really, really thoughtful, not just being compassionate because, I want to be kind to you, right? I want to be nice, and therefore I'm going to excuse you from all the exercises for this class. Well, is that the best thing I can do for you if you want to learn what you can based on where you are right now? Probably not. Do I want to say, well, suck it up, either you do everything or you fail? Well, you're going to fail. And so that's not the most helpful thing, also because the way our classes often work is, if you don't pass a class, then you have to wait another year before you can take it again. And that can slow you down, right? And so I actually would rather that nobody failed any of my particularly required classes, because I feel bad about somebody having failed and having to take the class again next year, they're not going to be much happier to take it second time around, first of all.
Yeah.
And second of all, they're going to have to wait another year to graduate. So my goal is you show me that you can do the most important things that this class is about. And I will verify that you can move to the next class. And that's actually really important too. Back to this idea of rigorous compassion is, what is it that a class is really supposed to accomplish? What are you supposed to be able to do when you leave a class? And again, used to be, well, you got to memorize all these things. Nah, I mean, that for a long time has not been that for me. And so I've had to think a lot about, okay, what are the basic things that a student really needs to be able to be competent at before I can risk having them go to the next class in the sequence, because it's a sequence of classes. If it's a one-off class, okay, it's not that big a deal. But the class that I teach in the fall, this one I was talking about, is the first in a sequence of classes, and my colleague is not going to be very happy at me if I send a student on who cannot do the basic things on which my colleague needs to build on.
Yeah.
But so what are those skills? And it's interesting that if you define those skills in a very straightforward, basic way, the basic skills for me are, you need to be able to do research, find out stuff that's reliable about stuff. And you need to be able to say things that are meaningful about something that you find meaningful. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult that a student cannot do that. And if a student is in fact in a place mentally where they just cannot do that, then it's probably happening in other classes as well. Yeah. And it does happen, and it's unfortunate, but it's actually very realistic that a student says, okay, at this point, 2/3 through the semester, I just cannot. I need to go back home. I need to take time off. Now's not the time for me to go through college. And in many cases, the student comes back 3 or 4 years later and says, okay, now I'm ready, and they do fine.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, so in a sense, in some cases, having a student not pass is actually the best thing for them. But my goal is, if a student's not going to pass, I want them to realize that, by November. And to think about, how does this fit with the rest of their studies, and does it make sense for them to take a break from college?
Yeah.
But if, otherwise, I want them to learn, because that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Do the students get any input into the syllabus?
Yeah. So the basic ideas behind the syllabus, the basic structure of the assignments is mostly fixed. But one of the things that I've been doing, following on a colleague's idea at another institution, is I put my syllabi always up as a Google Doc. And I put them up as anybody can comment on the internet. So if you all...
Comment or change?
Comment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's the key, right? That's one of the great things about Google Docs, right? Anyone can comment, and they can make suggestions. So, and one of the things that I often do is I say, this is a draft assignment until date X. Please comment on what you think is reasonable or not reasonable. And I have had students say, so for example, I had one assignment where I wanted students to, answer a number of different things for a closing commentary. And one student said, this feels like a lot. And I said, okay, how about 3 of 5? And the student answered, sure. And so I made it 3 of 5. So there are aspects, the details about the assignments that are absolutely feedbackable, right? The students can provide feedback. The other thing that students do is that they provide their own assessment of their participation. So 3 times through the semester, I say, okay, here's a rubric that you can use, but otherwise give me a sense, according to a point spread, of how much you feel you were accountable, you participated in the class so far. And so in that sense, the students can define what it has meant for them to be accountable. So
what does that look like, the actual...
What does it look like?
The results.
The results. So students tend to actually underscore themselves.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There are some students who don't, but students often will feel like they haven't done enough. Okay. And so you have to go in and say, no, you give yourself 7 out of 10 points, I'm going to give you 9, because I can see that you've been doing all these things. So the thing is, I can tell how the students are participating. But what it looks like is, it's really structurally about me telling the students that I trust you. Right? I trust you. And, in the description, I say, I will verify, right? I reserve the right to either lower or raise the score. But I want you to be accountable for how present you've been for the class. whether in person, or I also have a number of alternative exercises that can be done online. So for example, back to the accountability, if a student for whatever reason cannot come in person, they're off at a concert tour, they're very ill, whatever, they can do another assignment instead of the being in class assignment. Now, the downside of that is that if too many students do that, then not as many students come to class. However, the ones who come to class come ready to do the work.
Yeah.
And so there is that trade-off as well.
There is a vibe, though, that kind of dies.
It
when
does.
It's like, it's like, oh, there's only
20 of us instead of 60 or whatever.
Yeah.
And that, again, short of, and some students at the end of the semester say, hey, you should require attendance.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're annoyed at their classmates for not showing up. But my attitude is, if I require attendance, then people are going to show up and be annoyed. I mean, this has happened before. People are going to actually break the vibe by being like this.
Yeah.
Right. And you can't make people care. Now, one thing I'm going to change this coming fall is I'm going to make the alternative assignments less immediately visible. So my policy is every student needs to have access to every option of assignment. But the alternative assignments are only going to be visible once people start coming to me and saying, oh my God, here's the thing, I need an alternative assignment. Right?
Okay.
So I mean, word will get out and they'll be fine, but they won't be front and center in the syllabus the way they've been before. And I've struggled with that because that makes the flexibility less evident.
Yeah.
So it almost makes it like students have to ask, but actually what I plan to do is by week 3 or 4, if everybody doesn't already know, I'll put a note out saying, look, I know some of you have been doing this. If you cannot come, contact me and we'll find a way.
Yeah.
Right? So it requires the student reaching out rather than it being built into the structure of the syllabus. So some of the syllabus issue is how much do you spell out? How much do you provide to the entire class, of course, which is also kind of part of the syllabus, the evolving syllabus, but not part of the initial document. So the initial document has to be, here are the ground rules. And certainly, and I plan to do more of this, I haven't done enough of this, there are many classes where the students will actually create some of the ground rules themselves. So you say, here are the ground rules so far, but let's take 15 minutes, half an hour, however long, and let's brainstorm this. Is anything missing? Is anything on here not reasonable? Let's all decide that these ground rules are good. I've done this frequently with relatively small classes, 15, 20 students. With a big class, it can be complicated, particularly with sophomores, because often they don't quite yet know how to make that happen. But still, that is one thing, and every year, partly because otherwise I get bored. I mean, I've been teaching here 27 years, and after a while, it's like, I don't want to do exactly the same thing again. I want to change something up. And one of the things I want to make change, besides this idea of making the alternative less explicit, is trying to see if we can work together in the syllabus a little bit more the first couple of sessions. So rather than me saying, here it is, saying, okay, here it is, but also let's take even 20 minutes and Google Doc, right? Let's all comment on this. I want you to comment. I want you to tell me what we want to change. I want you to tell me what you want to add that you don't think is there and you really think should be there. And then we'll vote. And we'll see if we have a majority agreement, then it's going to stay in. And if we don't, then it's not. But yeah, the idea of giving students agency over the course so they can make choices is really important. Because for all of us, the more choices we can make, the more likely it is that we're willing to do the thing that's involved.
Yeah, we never like to be told what to do.
Exactly.
As humans. Yeah.
Exactly. And right. And especially if the thing that we're being told to do doesn't make much sense, right? It's one thing if we're being told to do a thing and we understand, okay, yeah, dang it, I get it. I need to do this. So if a performance teacher says, you know what, I really need you to change this embouchure because if you change it, then you're going to get this effect. And they might be able to demonstrate it. And the student says, oh, okay, I guess I can do that. It's a pain in the neck, but I understand why this is. And in the end, they may go ahead and do it and realize, okay, changing is good. It's more tricky, again, back to this idea of students don't come to the Butler School of Music to study music history, right? That's not, I mean, some of them do because they're nerds, but a small subset do that. And so oftentimes they see it, understandably, as, oh, well, here's another thing I need to do that I could be practicing instead. And sometimes they get a subtle message from people who matter to them that that's true. They should be practicing more. And I can't blame the students. They get stuck between a rock and a hard place. But as much as I can do to help students think about how the cultural way that music operates and the way that they tell the stories about it is part and parcel of them being a thoughtful musician and an effective musician. If you can't tell effective stories about why the music that you're playing matters, then it doesn't necessarily matter how well you can play. I mean, yeah, maybe you might be able to get a space in an ensemble where you're just playing, your instrument and the conductor makes all the decisions and you just do what you're told, right? Okay, but a lot of our students don't necessarily only want to do that. And if you want to be able to be out there in today's economy, right? In today's music professional market, which requires a great deal of flexibility and ways to make your music matter and show people why your music matters, then being able to tell stories about it is important, and being able to connect it to other kinds of music. And so, there are repertories that I just love to pieces. And so part of the reason why my job is awesome is that every day I get to come and I get to talk about music that I think is really wonderful in many ways. And I really enjoy. And I try to tap into the fact that, boy, this music is really beautiful and has potential today. And people today playing it make it really beautiful. And we do a lot of, I bring recordings in and I say, okay, here's 2 different ways to do this. What do you think? Which one's more authentic? Which one is going to sell better in the year 2024, right? And both considerations are important. And then, I keep reminding them, okay, most of you will probably not focus on repertory this early, but you play Mozart, you play Beethoven, you play Brahms. They've been dead a long time too. And if you play Brahms the way everybody plays Brahms, then what the heck's the point? Because everybody plays Brahms that way. So if you're going to approach Brahms and think about telling Brahms stories as a performer, both playing and talking in ways that are compelling, then you need to find information that's reliable. You need to be able to tell stories properly. So that's sort of, if you can do that at the basic level, then I'm going to send you off to the next class, because the next class engages repertories that are much more connected to common practice period. It starts around the early 18th century, it does Mozart, Beethoven, it goes into the early 19 teens. And so that is sort of where students tend to encounter the repertories that they play in orchestra and opera and so forth. And for that, the repertories themselves are not as much of an impediment to the students being interested. I've always had this, and I love the music, so I'm not complaining, but from the very first times I taught this, 25 years ago, I'd have students coming and showing up and thinking, and you could read on their face, plain chant, like, silent screaming, run away. And so over the years, I've tried to find different ways to approach that repertory to make it relevant. But also, we've been talking in our division a lot about, okay, well, do students need to? Is it a requirement for students to engage with these early repertories? For a long time, we said, yes, of course. How could you not, right? As of the students entering this fall, the students entering in the 2024 undergraduate catalog, music majors will not be required to take the entire music history sequence anymore. And now we are going to still offer the courses, but we are going to offer a variety of other classes, including my colleague Charles Carson's amazing hip-hop class. So students take Charles's class, Dr. Carson's class, and other classes as well, as alternatives, as complements to these earlier historical periods. And I fully expect for this class that I teach to become smaller and become more focused on the whole question of research and writing. Right? And some students will come into it just by default because music history 1. But because if they don't like the repertory they can run, then by week 2, the students who are sticking around will be more willing to be there. And so the whole question of accountability to some degree is tied to how much things matter. And yes, I think it's adulting to make things matter that may not inherently matter so much. So I encourage everybody to try to do that. But I know myself, right? We all know that can be complicated. And so as much choice as we have in terms of what we take that matters, we want to do. So what we're trying to do here, again, Charles Carson is part of this small cohort, is we're trying to build a best practice. What are best practices? A set of good practices for how to set up a course so that students can feel like their accountability is important, how that the flexibility that they need. So if they cannot be there every time, that there's another way for them to be accountable. And at the end of the day, how we are all accountable to each other in community, that we learn in community. I mean, that's one of the big things that, and EG really articulated this super well when we were putting this together, is this is where we learn best, especially in performing arts, especially at a college like this, at a university like this. You can learn a lot online. You can learn a lot on your own. The internet is a beautiful place with lots of information. But learning in community is an entirely different thing from just learning a thing by yourself. And it's something that we can do here as musicians, as performing artists, as teachers, and as students that we can't do online. Or it's harder to do online, or we can't do only online, even though we also have to think about what if somebody has to stay home? Can they join from online?
Yeah.
And I think the answer has to be yes, because otherwise we are not being accountable, right, to those members of our community who legitimately cannot physically be with us on a given day. And it's tricky, it's complicated, but we think that this is really important. And we're really glad that the Provost Teaching Fellows gave us the thumbs up to do this. Again, it's going to be a three-year initial project, expanding the people who are part of this, and then we're hoping to find external funding to roll it out and to get it happening more and more, not just here in music and theater and in College of Fine Arts, but also elsewhere at the university, because we think that there's a lot that the university can learn from performing arts. A lot of people.
I teach in Moody. Can I?
Right, exactly.
How do I join this?
That's exactly right. You know what? I mean, again, there's no reason why we can't do that. But different disciplines have different assumptions about what it means to learn, right? And so that I think is what the tricky thing. Again, I think it's a little easier for those of us in performing arts, in music, and in theater and dance, especially dance, to think about how do we do things similarly. So we might be able to build similar strategies. But then at some level, then the strategies have to expand and change, because if we want this idea to catch on and to be compassionate and to be accountable, right? I mean, both are really important. Then we need to be able to pass it or to give a chunk of it to somebody who's in engineering or in any other college of the university, and they can say, okay, the principles are good. The particular things you're doing, I can only use about a third of them. But here's another thing that you've pointed me to at another university that kind of resonates, that I think I could run with this. And there are a lot of people in STEM who are looking at some of these issues of grades as potentially reducing learning because people get so stressed out about them, right? Of trying to focus less on punitive, we got to punish people who are cheating, and more on how do we support people in building their strengths and helping everybody succeed, rather than saying, well, here's your bell curve, and then some people are always going to fail.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to, for the arts to be able to help that conversation, because, in the arts we have a lot to say, and oftentimes in the arts there's a sense that, the arts at the university sometimes. But I think in this respect, the idea of collaboration, right? Creative collaboration, that's the name of the game. Yeah. And so how do we help students build that accountability that you learn by showing up and by supporting each other, even when showing up might look different. And you embrace that people will be different when they show up, right? They'll have different ways of behaving, different strengths, some people write really well, some people talk better. And we need to honor the variety and we need to help everybody belong. Because when a student comes in and has a particular way of being that may not be as standard or maybe different from other students, it is not it's not compassionate, it's not accountable to cut them out because who they are and what they can do is different than what we expect. Mm-hmm. And so it's a cool thing for us to learn as well. I mean, that's been a big learning thing for me, is how do you design a course in ways that you yourself have not learned. And it's super easy for me to say, well, I learned this way, and I was taught to teach this way, and so this is what I'm going to do. But
and they don't teach it. Like,
right.
It's like my experience was undergrad. It was like this as a student. Yep. It's like this is the Bible. Yep. And then you get to graduate school, and it's like, oh, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, right?
And then you start teaching, and it's like, oh, this is something I have to do.
Right.
And then you get to the point where it's like, oh, this is this semester's.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
What's this semester's, right? And
Right,
what's the different language change?
Yeah.
And, and
Absolutely.
it just becomes like this kind of, you never really think about it that hard. So it's
Absolutely.
so cool you're doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it becomes a routine. And I have to say, one of the great things about our Center for Teaching and Learning at UT is that they're encouraging us faculty, both with structured support and with US dollars, to keep thinking about this. I think UT is a place where teaching is really valued, and there are especially some areas of UT that are continuously providing that support. So yeah, I mean,
it's so important.
Yeah, it's very important. So
because no graduate advisor, like PhD, advisor has ever talked to one of their students about, let me show you how to write a syllabus.
That's it.
Never. It's never ever happened. So it's so wonderful you're doing this.
Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure. And I'll say that one final thing is that our division, Musicology with Musicology, has every spring a course on pedagogy, on how to teach for our doctoral students. And so this last spring, I was looping some of our doctoral students into being part of this. So this is
that's really cool.
So really passing this on, not just among faculty, but also to our new graduate students. We would look forward to doing more of that. And thank you for your interest in this. We're really excited about how this is going to unfold over the next few months.
Yeah, we are too. We'd love to have you. So this is the start of the 3 years?
We are actually officially finishing the first quiet year, as it were, where we've been building strategies, we've been recruiting people, and we've been deciding exactly what it's going to look like, and we've just created a beta website. This coming year, our cohort with the faculty we've recruited is going to further implement some of these ideas, and we're asking every faculty member who's joining us, some of the grad students, to write little blog posts about here's what we've done and here's what's coming out. And so by this time next year, actually probably by April next year, we hope to have several blog posts up to kind of document this. And then there'll be at least one more year afterwards as we start expanding. And our goal is to make it a more, if not permanent, long-term thing with more resources. So stay tuned.
Awesome. And I'll put, as these blog posts come out, I'll update the things, so they'll be in the description below.
Thank you.
And maybe in like a year, we could come back and kind of find out how the first year went.
I'd love that.
And maybe even look at a syllabus.
Absolutely.
And kind of dive into
before
the details
and after
of
kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, because this is so important.
Thank you.
It's so important.
And if it works, what I'd really love to is to bring EG here, maybe one or two of the other folks, and have people, first of all, show you kind of how we work as a team, because it's fun, but also the kinds of different things that we're doing in different kinds of classes. So yeah, definitely look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.